Right, so we're going to go to our next speaker. So Carolyn is a former professor of women's studies, an empiricist, an ardent opponent of synthetic sexual identity, gender identity ideology, and the negation of empirical objective truth. And Carolyn's from the USA, and the title of your talk, Carolyn, is Women's Studies to Gender Studies.
So the reason that this is titled From the Real World to the Land of Make-Believe in the USA will become clear as we go through this journey to understand how women's studies came to, as I say, incubate the matricidal embryo, right? We're killing ourselves, and we have a hand in our own destruction. And you've been hearing that all the day here. Every Saturday that I tune in, we hear the same thing, right? Women are colluding in our own destruction. In the Declaration of Sentiments in 1848, the Seneca Falls Convention in New York was when suffragettes, the women who wanted to earn the right to vote for women in the United States, we gathered together and we talked about what led us to this point and how we were going to get the right to vote. Now, as you can see from this slide, the domination that women experience would not be possible if it were not for the active collusion of women. And this is how we got from women's studies, which was once related to our biological sex, that now is a chief proponent of gender theory. And there are three reasons for this. The first is a preference for the emotional and theoretical over the empirical, right? Over the scientific method, over what we know to be true from science, that women produce large gametes, that we have XX chromosomes in every cell of our body. These are immutable facts. And so that's the first one. The second one is a commitment to misguided inclusivity. So, right, we want to be inclusive of everyone. We're compassionate, so we want to make sure that everyone feels good. And then thirdly, postmodernism. And postmodernism we'll talk about a little bit later on. And this is how we got from women's studies to gender studies. And it's not just academic, but because it escaped from the university, as things tend to do, and it like a virus that escapes from a lab and continues to shape society's perspectives about the very existence of biological sex. In 1949, Margaret Mead, an American anthropologist, endeavored to study sex roles across various cultures to determine whether masculine and feminine were based entirely on cultural conditioning. And her book in 1949, Male and Female, concluded that certain differences in behavior were determined by primary sex differences, like females' roles in childbearing and nursing, and men's size and upper body strength. And this is really important, in societies where the differentiation of sex roles breaks down or becomes unbalanced, the social fabric is weakened. Also, the charts that are across cultures, which tasks are done more often by females and which more often by males, and that kind of thing. Anyway, whatever tasks are performed by men hold higher prestige in most societies in order, we imagine, to compensate for women's reproductive contributions. And this is what feminists came to later call Venus envy. The impact and influence of Mead's work in the United States cannot be overstated. Valerie Saving is probably someone of whom you have not heard. However, her article, The Human Situation, A Feminine View, is available on PDF for free on the internet. And she was also very influential. Karl Marx had said, the criticism of religion is the main complete. It is the beginning of all criticism. And that's what she did. She was a theologian. This is a foundational critique of patriarchal religion. And it started with the understanding that one of man's strongest temptations is to identify his own limited perspective with universal truth. And this is the part that really captivated me. In a patriarchal society, the male concerns himself with pride, will to power, assertion of the ego, and power and prestige. By reducing those others to the status of mere objects, which can then be treated as appendages of the self and manipulated accordingly. Those are her words. Okay, so when you look at what Judeo-Christian tradition considers sinful, that's what they are, right? Will to power, pride, assertion of ego, power. But she says the female, in contrast, tends not toward the assertion of the self, but the underdevelopment or negation of the self, characterized by diffuseness, a lack of organizing center or focus, dependence on others for one's own self-definition, tolerance at the expense of standards of excellence, and the inability to respect the boundaries of privacy, sentimentality, that's important, that's really important, and the mistrust of reason. And those male and female proclivities contributed in large measure to the transformation of women's studies. Betty Friedan, 1963, The Feminine Mystique. The criticism of this book is important for so many reasons, but one of the main criticism of the book focused on issues of white, middle-class, heterosexual women. And that raised feminist consciousness, and we realized, oh, wow, we need to be much more inclusive, diverse, equitable, etc. So rightfully, we elevated the voices of those who are not white, who are not heterosexual, who are not able-bodied, who are not in the middle class, who are not educated. But in the 2000s, inclusion became a Trojan horse, and it permitted males to storm the gates and literally and figuratively invade women's spaces and experiences. Women's studies started as an attempt to understand the female experience. The first women's studies program in the USA was in 1970 in San Diego State. The definition I'm working with appears on the screen. Adult human female, female being the sex that gives birth, that typically has XX chromosomes in every cell and that produces large gametes. Why did we have this? So we wanted to understand, to challenge, first of all, the typical university curriculum that assumed and upheld male experience as normative. It was intended to draw from and apply methodologies of humanities, medicine, and natural science to the female experience. So, informed by Karl Marx's thesis that the philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways, the point, however, is to change it. The goal of women's studies in 1970 was not merely understanding and analyzing women's experience, history, exploitation, and oppression, labor, issues related to fertility and sexuality, family, work, and society, but to raise consciousness of power structures, criticize the status quo, effect social change, and rouse activism. So of course, when you're a university student, this is all very heady stuff. And students were animated by regarding themselves as what we might now term woke, enlightened, and more aware of than others of new ways of thinking, new vocabulary, new categories, and new interpretations. Now, this was facilitated greatly by the disaggregation of data. So now they were collecting more data about women and men. And so we were able to identify discrimination. We were able to ensure equitable distribution of resources, advance research agendas, and inform policy to promote equality and reduce disparities. And of course, all of that with the trans agenda is up in the air, because if we can't collect that data accurately anymore, then we won't have those things. And that's what we see being eroded. Okay. So crucial statistics are rapidly being eroded by permitting individuals to opt out of sex identification, identify their sex as they wish, and even retroactively alter birth certificates. In 2021, in August, the American Medical Association recommended removing the category of sex, in quotation marks, typically based solely on an external evaluation on birth certificates in order to encourage the physician's non-judgmental recognition of patients' gender identities. The US Department of State now permits X for sex on passports. And this may well herald at some point soon the end of the ability to have any useful data on women's advancement and need of development. Okay, so postmodernism has really affected the university a great deal. It came from Foucault, Derrida, Kristeva, certainly the French postmodernists. And there, if you want to read more about postmodernism in the university setting and how it has escaped to larger society, I highly recommend Cynical Theories by Helen Pluckrose and James Lindsay. So it demands that objective knowledge be regarded as unobtainable. We cannot know for sure that anything is true, because it says all knowledge is culturally constructed. So that means science, empirical facts through the scientific method, reason, and logic all become regarded as tools of the power structure, which is always oppressive and evil in postmodernism. Okay, so that means that, you know, the scientific method is our best way of coming to peace, because if we could all agree that on the scientific method of proving something and having it be replicable and using the accurate methods and all of that, then we can agree on its results. But postmodernism says, no, you never can. Okay. Number two, existing binaries like sex are to be elided into, like, to be regarded as continua, right? So you can't have male or female. There's all these many steps along the way. This is what we're supposed to see. And the more marginalized and freakish the group, the more the voice should be amplified, no matter how small a number. And that's what we're seeing, right? Third, diversity, inclusion, race, equity become the new religion that silences all heretics. And we'll get to a little bit more on that later. Actually, I posted in the chat about Mary Harrington's new book, Feminists Against Progress. And she talks about how middle-class educated women are part of the new clerisy, the new clergy, the high priestesses, the inquisitors who are maintaining and promulgating the trans agenda. It's not just the men, it's women who are complicit. Personal anecdotes of lived experience, fictitious stories, and narratives are perceived not simply as equivalent to, but more valid than logic, statistics, and a scientific collection of data. This is where we are. And this is where universities are right now. Okay. Now, 1990, we had Judith Butler write Gender Trouble. And she wrote, there is no female or male biological reality. And we're seeing this quite a bit. All these people who are saying they refuse to acknowledge the scientific fact of biological sex. She made the case for acceptance and normalization. And once again, in the university, anything that's new, people grab onto, because you have to continually prove your relevance in higher education. And how do you do that? By gripping onto the new, and especially in the social sciences and English, because science, hard sciences like physics, chemistry, biology, they were making all these new discoveries. And so the other folks weren't, and they got jealous, and they wanted to have the new, right? So there's this neophilia stuff going on. So anything that's novel, theoretical, and emotional took the place of reality. And that helps us to understand why people assert gender as the same people who assert gender as merely a social construct physically alter their bodies. Doesn't otherwise fit, right? If it's a social construct, why are you replacing your healthy tissues and organs? Okay, now here's the problem. Women's studies adopted this framework. And when you have a flawed, unfounded, foundational knowledge base, what happens? You're going to build faulty structures on top of that. You have to have a solid foundation to build something solid on top. When I used to teach women's studies, I absolutely taught the use of the term gender to theoretically differentiate between biological reality of sex and the socially constructed norms, behaviors, and roles. We regarded it as theory, and we taught it as theory. And somehow, not somehow, we know how, it has become reified, right? So now it has become not a theory anymore, but something that is like gravity, like a law, that gender is different from sex, and that it can be changed. But these people are trying to change their sex, so something doesn't fit here. Okay. So it quickly undermined female biological reality. Now, here's where I'm coming from. In 1979, Janice Raymond wrote, and this is also available in full PDF for free on the internet, The Transsexual Empire, The Making of the She-Male. She was a women's studies professor. In those days, we generally agreed that the attempt of males to appropriate the female sex was inimical to feminism and reinforced gender stereotypes, like these men pretending to be females that I see down here in Miami all the time. They have huge breasts. They wear as little clothing as possible as they rollerblade down Collins Avenue in Miami and South Beach. It's absolutely reinforcing, buttressing these gender stereotypes. I keep telling people, be as gender nonconforming as you like, but do not claim to be the other sex. And this quote is a strong quote, but I love it. I wish that everyone would take a screenshot of it because it's important. All transsexuals rape women's bodies by reducing the real female form to an artifact, appropriating this body for themselves. The transsexually constructed lesbian feminist violates women's sexuality and spirit. Rape, though it is usually done by force, can also be accomplished by deception. Janice Raymond revealed that this phenomenon resulted in part not only from psychiatric disturbance, but from medicine and psychology serving as secular religions. Replacing and the medical empire, and we know big pharma, We know how powerful Big Pharma is. We know that they stand to benefit tremendously. We know Pritzker is one of the billionaires behind all the cui bono, who follow the money and who benefits the most. Big Pharma, big medicine. They replace morality and ethics with technical ability. This is Frankenstein all over again. Reread Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. If you haven't read it in a while, I highly recommend doing so. And you're just going to see, oh my God, this is exactly what we're doing. And so now, less than 2 decades after its founding, women's studies was conjoined with gender studies. University programs with gender in the title outnumber women's studies programs 5-1. And in the United States in 2018, the National Women's Studies Association said this: statement against the redefinition of sex. As an association focused on the intersectional study of sex and gender, we reject the notion that sex is immutable, biologically determined binary. In direct contrast with lived experiences, erroneously defining sex through violent colonial, medical, and social constructions of gender. Okay, so what we have here is the once promising field of women's studies. We could have done so much if we stuck to the empirical. Now it's gender ideology. Postmodernism displaced reality and empiricism and infected academia with emotional appeals to accept and normalize the most outlandish and rightfully marginalized in the name of diversity and inclusion. And then, like I said, the virus escaped from the ivory tower and has now infected the broader society. And this is how you can get in touch with me. That's it.